Julia never imagined that saving the wrong billionaire in an accident would change her life forever. While taking care of his grandmother to pay for her mother's surgery, she would uncover secrets from the past that threatened her love. But it would also make her believe in redemption and the strength of hope. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Please like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The early morning in New York carried the sticky warmth of spring, mixed with the smell of hot concrete and fresh bagels from the 24-hour diners that lit up the streets as Julia exited the public hospital. The blue uniform, already marked by sweat and stains from a long shift, dripped discreetly onto the ground as her hurried footsteps echoed on the old pavement of Fifth Avenue. Her tired eyes passed over the mountain of papers that tied her lab coat. Her worn backpack hung from one shoulder, and her mind couldn't stop thinking about the mother waiting for her at home, fragile and struggling to breathe. Each of her steps carried the weight of a responsibility that felt heavier than her own body. The distant noise of cars echoed, while a warm breeze made the sleeve of her uniform sway, and that night had an aroma of anxiety and a hint of old coffee on the corner. It was then that the shrill sound of a screeching brake cut through the calm. An out-of-control car skidded around the corner, forcing the tires to scream loudly against the asphalt until the impact came. A dry thud, shattered glass scattered across the sidewalk, and the red light of the traffic signal flashing like an emergency signal. "Over here!" she shouted, pushing her way through the small crowd that had gathered around the overturned vehicle. In the midst of the chaos, a man lay fallen, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the luxury she imagined belonged to any important man. His eyes, half open and wet with blood staining his face, searched for something or someone. Julia dropped to her knees beside him almost automatically. Her skilled and steady hands began to assess the situation, as if that body were the only important one in the world at that moment. "What's your name? Can you hear me?" Her voice came out low, but carried an urgency that cut through the confusing noise of whistles and murmurs. She felt the weak pulse under her sweaty fingers, almost imperceptible, and his irregular breathing betrayed a silent struggle for life. The car had skidded violently on a tight turn on Broadway, and she knew there wasn't much time. The ambulance siren sliced through the air, accentuating the red lights reflecting on Julia's sweaty skin. Assisting the paramedics, she held the man's hand, feeling the fragility of each second slipping away between them. "Come on, girl, don't let him go," murmured a paramedic as they lifted the patient into the emergency room. Only when the flash of cameras from journalists began to pop at the hospital where Julia worked did the true identity of that man emerge as a truth no one expected. "Leonardo Smith," someone whispered beside her, the voice heavy with surprise and disbelief. The name reverberated strongly in that humble place, where Julia spent her days and nights caring for anonymous bodies that had no address in the newspapers. She, who knew firsthand the harsh reality of lack of resources, now faced a world as distant as the stars. The contrast between them was brutal. While Leonardo carried the weight of the real estate empire that had brought him fortune and power, Julia bore the courage and tireless exhaustion of someone who lives to care for others, even when her own life challenged the limits of hope. "The emergency team will do everything possible," said the emergency doctor, giving Julia a secret look of respect. "You have miraculous hands, you know." She smiled with a hint of irony, her restless gaze fixed on the patient, feeling the weight of that responsibility. At that moment, he was just someone in need of help. As the hours passed and procedures followed, Julia remained close, her thoughts crowded with doubts, fears, and an unexpected curiosity about the man who, despite everything, seemed so vulnerable. Amid the sounds of machines and hurried footsteps in the white corridor, she felt her reality tremble. The encounter was not just a rescue, but the beginning of something that transcended the hospital walls. Outside, the city continued its hectic rhythm, but she could not pull away from that unlikely connection. She knew that while Leonardo fought for his life there, her mother waited at home, revitalized by the hope of new days, but still trapped in the uncomfortable shadow of an unrelenting illness. The tension in the hands she held was the most tangible feeling. Life slipping between fingers, the chance for change hidden in that fragile moment. Julia took a deep breath, feeling the sweat trickle down her face, mixing with the tears she couldn't let fall. The lights of the hospital blurred as her thoughts turned to her mother, to the uncertain future, and to the fate that had just crossed her path. At that moment, there were no rich or poor, just human beings caught by a thin thread called hope. As the clock outside ticked silently, Julia knew that from then on, their lives would be forever intertwined. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Please like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The sun began to spill a timid golden light through the hospital windows, while the distant sound of horns and hurried voices announced the awakening of the city. Julia sat beside Leonardo's bed, where silence was woven by the constant beep of the heart monitor and the subtle scent of disinfectant. The stark, impersonal environment seemed to conceal untold stories, and this was just one of them. Leonardo, a man always surrounded by luxury and power, was now vulnerable, his bruises and cuts highlighting his fragility. There was no glimmer of wealth on that hardened face, only a human being fighting for life. Julia observed, aware of the chasm that existed between their realities. She, a hard-working nurse from the outskirts, had grown up amidst struggles and uncertainties, while he was the owner of worlds and empires. "You have miraculous hands," commented the emergency doctor, casting her a respectful and conspiratorial glance. She merely smiled wryly, trying to absorb the weight of that silent responsibility. At that moment, for Julia, Leonardo was just someone in need of care, nothing more. In the following days, Julia divided her time between the hospital and her modest home, where her mother anxiously awaited news and the expensive treatment that threatened to consume what little they had. The connection she felt with Leonardo grew, despite the glaring differences between their lives. Their brief conversations and moments of shared silence in the hospital room began to form something undefined, a bridge between two worlds. One day Henry, Leonardo's cousin and right-hand man, entered the room with an air of authority and suspicion. His cold gaze quickly landed on Julia. "Who are you?" he questioned sharply. "I'm Julia, the nurse who took care of him," she replied firmly, trying not to be shaken by his condescending tone. "I hope you're up to the task," he retorted, his voice laden with judgment. Henry's presence made it clear that in the universe to which Leonardo belonged, Julia was an intruder. However, far from being intimidated, she felt her determination grow to prove that this unexpected connection could be more than circumstantial. As the days passed, Julia became a constant presence beside the billionaire. Amidst medical procedures, she saw another side of Leonardo, a tired, frightened man who was sometimes surprisingly vulnerable. In a moment, when she carefully adjusted the blanket over his shoulders, she witnessed a rare smile escape his lips, a silent sign that her presence made a difference. "Do you believe I can be different?" he asked, his voice low and raspy, as if revealing an ancient secret. "I didn't say that," she replied, placing her hand over his, feeling the warmth of that unusual touch. "But I believe there's always a chance." That moment brought a mix of hope and fear, the silent understanding that they both longed for something they had yet to allow themselves to fully feel. However, confronting that feeling would not be easy. The society in which Leonardo lived demanded that he maintain an unshakable image, distant from people like Julia. On the other hand, she struggled against deep-rooted insecurities and the fear of not being enough, suffocated by the daily challenges life imposed on her. Still, with each encounter, the thin line between the possible and the forbidden grew thinner. Amidst glances, notes of music escaping from an old radio in the waiting room, and the aromas of coffee that Julia brought during breaks, a new story began to pulse, filled with doubts, desires, and the courage that only arises in the most resilient hearts. As the city awakened outside, with its chaotic and contradictory scenery, the intimate plot of Julia and Leonardo began to unfold. They knew the road would be tortuous, that the weight of social differences and family expectations would make each step a challenge, but something within them whispered that, even against all odds, they could create something real. And so, between the white corridors of the hospital and the bustling streets of New York, they began to intertwine their stories, discovering that hope can arise in the most unexpected places. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The morning continued its course with the slowness of someone carrying 1,000 pages of anguish in their backpack. In the simple apartment where she lived, Julia prepared coffee, her hands still trembling from the restless night and the shock that a stubborn fate insisted on imposing on her. The intense aroma of fresh coffee filled the small space amidst the subtle clinking of cups and the distant noise of New York traffic. The news on the radio spoke of political crises and scandals, but for Julia, the real storm brewed within her. She barely had time to think about how different her routine would become after the accident until the answering machine rang, bringing the impersonal and urgent voice from the clinic where her mother was hospitalized. The surgery had been postponed due to lack of resources, and the bills piled up in a stack that threatened to bury her hopes. Julia sat down, exhausted, her body heavy, yet her mind racing. It was there that her strength and vulnerability intertwined. She needed a miracle. But the miracle, she thought, doesn't usually arrive wrapped in gift paper. It comes in the form of unlikely choices and unexpected alliances. That's when her phone vibrated again, this time with an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered the call. On the other end of the line, a deep, controlled voice called her name. It was Leonardo. "Julia, we need to talk," he said. The acidic passion of hospitality faded, replaced by a firm voice and a purpose. Feeling her throat dry and her breath quicken, she agreed, unsure of what to expect from this conversation, coming from the other side of the social divide that until then seemed insurmountable. The meeting was set for the luxurious office on Fifth Avenue. Julia felt the weight of the building as soon as she entered, the cold temperature of the air conditioning hitting against her still warm skin. The striking contrast of Italian marble and the carefully selected artworks threatened to take her breath away. Her heart hammered a nervous symphony, and her hands gripped the strap of her bag. Leonardo was waiting for her in the conference room, behind an imposing table that seemed to create a natural distance between them. He looked impeccable in his dark suit, the tie perfectly aligned, his gaze burning with mystery and determination. "Julia, I know about the difficulties you are facing," he began, his hands crossed over the table, "and I am willing to help your mother, your family." She swallowed hard, surprised by the offer, but soon doubt crept in. What would be the price of such generosity? "There's no such thing as a free lunch," she murmured, recalling the countless times life demanded an invisible yet painful toll. He smiled, his expression shifting to something more human, almost recognizing the resistance that marked her story. "I need you to do me a favor," he confessed. "I need you to pretend to be my companion. at some social events. I propose a deal. You help me maintain appearances, and I will take care of your medical expenses. Julia felt the world spin beneath her feet for a moment. Was this an invitation or a trap? You want me to be part of this world of lies? It's not a lie. It's strategy, Leonardo corrected, pulling a white envelope from his pocket that seemed to contain both a promise and a challenge. She looked at the envelope hesitantly, her hands trembling, her gaze seeking refuge somewhere between doubt and despair. If you accept, your mother will receive the best possible treatment, he stated firmly. And if I refuse? She asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Leonardo's eyes lost their rigidity for a moment, revealing something Julia never expected. Understanding, and perhaps a hint of fear. You won't refuse. Because I know what it's like to love someone enough to swallow your pride. In the silence that followed, Julia felt the weight of the decision crush her chest. Accepting meant entering a world far removed from her own, with unknown rules and risks. Refusing meant watching her mother's health deteriorate helplessly. She took a deep breath, her fingers wrapping around the envelope, as if holding onto a chance for salvation. 6 months. Not a day more, she said, her voice low but resolute. Leonardo nodded, a thread of relief crossing his gaze. The contract will be ready tomorrow. From then on, nothing will be as it was, he concluded. At that moment, even unknowingly, Julia began to chart a course that would take her far beyond the corridors of the hospital, in a delicate dance between social lies, intimate fears, and newfound hope. As she exited the building, with the city lights reflecting off the glass around her, a gentle breeze brought with it the distant scent of the ocean mixed with the frenetic traffic. She knew that, for the first time, the future would open a door, frightening, complex, yet necessary. And on the other side, Leonardo watched her leave, sensing that this gamble, made of courage and necessity, could be the beginning of the change he had long resisted facing. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The next morning arrived grey, with low clouds covering the sky of New York and the strong scent of the ocean mixed with the humidity in the air. Julia woke up early, her mind restless, feeling the weight of the agreement she had made the night before. In her small apartment, the grey walls seemed to close in on her, where the silence was only broken by her heavy breathing and the sound of the clock ticking. Each second an inevitable step toward the future that awaited her. The envelope lay on the worn wooden table, white and empty, except for her name scrawled in one corner. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was the bridge between two lives, a contract that closed one destiny while simultaneously opening another. With trembling hands, Julia picked up the phone, another call from her mother informing her about the delay in the start of the surgery, which tightened the knot of anxiety in her chest. The thought of her mother, fragile and suffering, was like an invisible knife embedded in the core of the nurse. In the afternoon, Julia felt the biting cold of the waiting room in the corporate hospital where Leonardo awaited her. The atmosphere was a mix of sophistication and detachment, with glass panels filtering the pale light of the late afternoon. She knew she didn't belong there, yet she walked confidently, framed by the insecurity that her worn jeans and simple blouse contrasted with the luxury surrounding her. Leonardo stood up upon seeing her, still bearing the pale bruises from the accident, but with a firm gaze and a subtle tension in his shoulders. Without words, he handed her the prepared contract, its pages smelling of fresh paper and contained expectations. "Read it carefully," he said, averting his gaze for a moment and running a hand through his dark brown hair, an involuntary gesture that revealed his hidden anxiety. As Julia read each clause, She realized that the agreement was not merely a formality. It strengthened the ties between their two lives, but it also imposed rules and restrictions that separated the real world from the freedom they both desired. "You talk a lot about appearances," she commented, looking up and meeting his cold eyes. "But what happens when the truth cannot fit into the script?" He stared for an intense moment, her voice almost fading away. "Sometimes the truth needs a little disguise to survive," he replied, his voice low but firm. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Julia. Amid her shifts at the public hospital, she had to prepare for high society events where she would accompany Leonardo. Luxurious dinners, openings, and fragile gatherings woven between smiles and empty gazes. The feeling of being watched, analyzed, made her feel boxed in, like a standout actress on a stage of a play she hadn't chosen to join. In that world, the protocols were cold, the conversations rehearsed, and the people moving masks. She tried to learn the rules naturally, while the lash of her own prejudice, for being poor, simple, and unknown, cracked in every unspoken word, in every sidelong glance. On the other hand, Leonardo watched Julia with a mix of intense admiration and conflict. In his loneliest moments, he saw in her sincere and unpretentious manner a reflection of himself that he had long forgotten, the search for something genuine amidst the superficiality surrounding him. However, the fear of past ghosts and family pressure made him retreat in silent steps, like a dancer trapped on a stage he didn't know how to master. One of those nights, during an opulent party in a Miami condominium, Julia felt the weight of the crowd like a countercurrent. Expensive clothes, sparkling jewelry, empty words, everything formed a setting where she was the outsider. In Leonardo's hands, her grip opened and closed, uncertain, as curious glances dissipated any attempt to be natural. "Are you okay?" he murmured, almost inaudible, as the rhythm of the music blended with the chatter around them. "I'm learning," she replied with a trembling smile, feeling her words sound fragile. The silence between them was heavy with subtext, fear of surrendering, repressed desire, doubts about the future. They almost touched, almost connected, but the sound of a phone call cut through the moment, breaking the magic before it could happen. On the way back to the car, Leonardo spoke for the first time about his past. He revealed the suffocating pressure his family exerted to maintain appearances, the fear of exposing himself and losing everything he seemed to possess. Julia listened attentively, perceiving in his words a humanity that didn't fit in the headlines. "You're not alone," she said firmly, holding his hand with more conviction. He didn't respond, but an invisible spark said more than words could. The relationship between the two continued to navigate through encounters and misunderstandings, a delicate balance between what was possible and what fear insisted on denying. Time, relentless, crossed their paths with difficult decisions and choices that could seal not only their destinies, but also the lives of all those they loved. And as the city pulsed outside, with its frantic rhythm and distant noises, Julia and Leonardo discovered that, despite appearances and social masks, love could bloom in the most unlikely places, even if it required the courage to reinvent themselves every day. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The day timidly brightened over New York, tinting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink as the city awoke to its busy routine. Julia walked along the sidewalk of Ocean Drive, her rhythmic steps echoing on the rough concrete. The bag hung carelessly on her shoulder, contrasting with the tense expression marking her face. That morning was the beginning of a new battle, her first public appearance as Leonardo Smith's companion, a position that weighed heavily on her chest between shame, fear, and a curious mix of hope. The building where Leonardo lived displayed classic grandeur, with glass doors reflecting the sunrise and the already heavy traffic of the metropolis. Inside the elevator, the silence between them was almost as dense as the charged atmosphere of the city. Leonardo, in his impeccable dark suit, stared intently at the control panel, avoiding any eye contact. Julia felt the tension pulsing between them, a silent melody of expectations and fears. Upon arriving at the art gallery hosting the evening event, Julia was greeted by curious gazes, some inquisitive, others clearly judgmental. The gallery exuded a subtle perfume of fine woods and fresh paint, while the abstract paintings hanging on the walls created a sophisticated and almost intimidating setting. Leonardo introduced Julia to his contacts with the precision of someone maneuvering pieces on a chessboard, always attentive to the slightest detail that could compromise the image he had built. During the cocktail, Julia tried to adapt to the protocol, holding the champagne flute without appearing shaky, smiling naturally, and avoiding stumbling over conversations filled with business jargon. Even so, every word spoken felt heavy, like a coin minted in doubt. Amidst that shiny surface, however, a gaze found hers with unexpected intensity. It was Robert, Leonardo's brother, approaching with firm steps and a rigidity on his face that betrayed a silent judgment. "So it's you?" Robert said, his voice low but cutting, as he extended his hand with a grip bordering on hostility. Julia swallowed hard, feeling the pressure of that confrontation that went beyond mere social protocol. "Nice to meet you," she replied with a polite smile, although her heart raced as if facing a storm about to break. Leonardo quickly intervened, his voice firm, further releasing the tension. "Julia is important to me," he stated, looking directly at his brother. Robert was unconvinced. His icy gaze seemed to pierce the small distance between them. "Important or convenient?" he provoked, leaving the phrase hanging in the air like a subtle poison. That tension echoed with the past, suspicions, resentments, and secrets that time had failed to erase. Julia felt Leonardo's gaze harden as he struggled to maintain control in that hostile environment. Later, on the way back, the same city that had welcomed him now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Leonardo drove silently through the chaotic traffic, his hands steady on the wheel. Julia, sitting beside him, fought to control a mix of emotions. The confrontation with Robert had shaken the stability they were trying to build, forcing reality to impose itself brutally. "You knew he wouldn't accept it easily," Leonardo said, his voice heavy but trying not to sound defeated. "This is more complicated than I imagined," Julia admitted, looking out the window where the city lights began to flicker on, reflecting in the glass in golden stripes. In the days that followed, their coexistence grew more tense, as if unspoken words and doubts accumulated between gestures and evasive glances. Julia found herself trapped in a painful dilemma: accept the unwritten rules of that universe or fight for her authenticity. The shadow of Robert and social judgments loomed larger, creating invisible walls that threatened to shatter the delicate balance. In an unexpected moment, during a rainy afternoon, Julia received a message from her mother, written with the fragility of tired hands. "My daughter, I am proud of the courage you are showing. Stay strong. I love you." The words deeply moved her. The strength of that message, filled with love and hope, reignited the flame that threatened to extinguish in the face of adversity. Julia realized that her place, no matter how distant it seemed from Leonardo's world, was being built there, amid challenges and small daily victories. Even under pressure, they found moments of true intimacy, sharing a coffee in his makeshift kitchen, relaxed laughter during conversations about music and books, and authentic impressions that made the scene of deception feel less cold. Leonardo's heart also began to open, in small fissures that revealed his fears and desires. He didn't just want to maintain an image. He was starting to yearn for a truth, no matter how painful it might be. But time offered no respite, bringing new responsibilities, family pressures, and the inevitable passage of days, pointing toward an uncertain destiny. Each step on the tightrope of that relationship symbolized a risky choice between the comfort of the known world and the boldness of true love. And in that tangled web of feelings, conflicts, and discoveries, Julia and Leonardo understood that love, to flourish, demands more than chance encounters. It requires courage, commitment, and the ability to transform lives without losing essence. Tell us in the comments from which city you are watching and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The fine rain continued to fall over Chicago, forming a grey curtain that seemed to muffle the noise of the busy avenue. In the modest apartment where Julia lived, the sound of water hitting the window mixed with the cold crackle of the news on the television, reporting more cuts to the public system and the growing inequalities she knew all too well. It was a heavy morning, one of those that weigh on the chest and squeeze memories like clenched fists. Julia watched the thin steam rising from her coffee cup, the bitter and familiar aroma trying to warm her restless soul. In recent weeks, Leonardo's offer had turned her life into a tightrope walk. Far from the safety of the public hospital and the world she knew, she faced increasingly disapproving looks and a growing discomfort to fit into the elite Chicagoan universe. And at the center of it all, the silent weight of the lie that was supposed to protect her. That morning, however, a new element emerged, an anonymous message left on her phone during the night, a veiled threat. The cold words spoke of real interests behind the deal with Leonardo, demanding that she abandon any pretense of crossing that social line or pay dearly. A tremor ran through her skin as she read the message, a clear warning that danger did not only come from the Smith family, but from invisible enemies in the power game. Julia's heart hammered out of sync as she contemplated her own limits. How far am I willing to go, she thought, her eyes tearing up as the storm beat outside the room, mirroring the whirlwind of emotions that rose like an uncontrollable torrent. A gentle knock on the door made her look up. Leonardo entered, closing the door behind him with a soft click that seemed to seal a pact between the two disparate worlds. His dark eyes searched hers, mixing concern with unwavering determination. "Did you see the message?" he asked, his voice hoarse, carrying the tension of the last hours. Julia nodded, trying to control her breathing, but fear translated into every unspoken word. "They won't make it easy," Leonardo continued, stepping closer and taking her hands in a rare gesture of vulnerability. "But I can't allow anyone to hurt you. I don't want to become a pawn in your game," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to be seen for who I really am." He squeezed her hands, his rough fingers conveying a strength that contradicted his exposed fragility. "I do too," he confessed. "This game has suffocated me for years, and maybe you are the only one who can show me a different path." The silence that followed was not an emptiness, but a shared breath, a tacit acknowledgement that there would be no turning back without both risking everything. That afternoon, Julia received an unexpected visit. Robert, Leonardo's brother, entered without warning, bringing a more human air than in previous encounters. On his face, marked by tension, there was a sincerity that surprised them both. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with a mix of concern and exasperation. "If this continues, we will only destroy everything our family has built." Julia looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a mix of challenge and exhaustion. For a moment, social differences seemed secondary in the face of the human complexity they shared. "Everything can change, if you allow it," she replied firmly. "But nothing true can be built on lies and fear." Robert took a deep breath, as if he had been carrying a heavy burden for years. "I just want what's best for everyone," he murmured. But sometimes the best is hard to reach when the heart gets lost along the way. As the conversation flowed, Leonardo entered the room, closing the door behind him, as if he too were seeking a truce amid the conflict. The weakness and strength of the three intertwined in the heavy air of that Chicago afternoon. That night, Julia and Leonardo met in his apartment. The city lights shone timidly through the window, blue and orange reflections mingling with the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sitting side by side on the worn sofa, they shared an intimate space, away from masks and obligations. "I'm scared," Julia admitted, her voice trembling as she settled her hands between his. Leonardo pulled her closer, the warmth of his body contrasting with the night's chill. "Me too," he confessed, his voice almost a whisper that seemed to cut through the darkness. "Fear of losing you, fear of failing." She touched his face, feeling the imperfections, the humanity he sometimes hid. "We're not perfect," she said with a sad smile, "but that doesn't mean we can't be real." In that moment, through small gestures and soft words, the promise of a shared truth began to take shape. A difficult path, perhaps, but one that could offer something neither had found before, the freedom to love without masks. The future, though uncertain, didn't seem as frightening as before. Because that night, Julia and Leonardo learned that love, true love, is born in the courage to expose oneself, in the risk of being vulnerable, and in the hope of reinventing their own story together. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from, and give a rating from 0 to 10 for this story. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The sun painted the horizon of Chicago with a soft yellow as the city was still waking up under the distant hum of morning traffic. Julia and Leonardo had spent the last night between whispers and gestures that broke down the barriers erected by life. A night when both souls had let their masks fall, finally revealing the hidden truth beneath the surface. That morning, Julia's phone vibrated insistently. She answered with renewed hope, but the voice on the other end was cold, relentless. "Julia, we have news about your mother," said the hospital secretary, hesitating before continuing. "The insurance approved the procedure, but a deposit of $20,000 will be necessary." The word fell heavily on her, like a loose stone rolling down a cliff. "20,000, she murmured, her voice trembling. "That's a lot of money." Leonardo, who was present in the room, heard the whisper and extended his hand. Without her asking, he handed over his credit card. His eyes carried a mix of generosity and a deep shadow that revealed how much that decision weighed on him. "I won't let her wait," he said firmly. "This urgency cannot be ignored." Julia looked at him, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. "Will this ever stop?" she thought, her eyes misty. She knew he had his own ghosts, but the very distance between their worlds seemed to narrow with each silent act, practiced and loaded with meaning. In the following days, their routine took on an almost rehearsed rhythm, Julia caring for her mother in the hospital, and, at night, attending social events with Leonardo, trying to maintain the fragile balance between two such distinct universes. Each public encounter became an exercise in restraint, an improvised spectacle where she needed to forget her own essence to fit into the imposed script. On one of those nights, at the rooftop of one of the most iconic buildings in downtown Chicago, the party pulsed with champagne and conversations tinged with veiled ambitions. Julia, dressed in a blue silk dress that made her body look like a portion of starry sky, tried to maintain her composure while sensing the heavy gaze of Mariana, Leonardo's ex-girlfriend. Mariana approached with a forced smile, her eyes shining with a cutting light. "So this is the new company." Her low voice carried an almost perceptible venom. Julia felt her hands sweat, her heart hammering against her chest like a war drum. Before she could respond, Leonardo appeared at her side, his presence firm and imposing, like an invisible shield. "Mariana," he said, his voice hoarse, as if containing a world of stories, "this is Julia, and I hope you learn to respect those who are by my side." Mariana let out a false laugh and stepped back. "We'll see how long this story lasts," she said, looking over her shoulder as she walked away. After the abrupt exit, Leonardo turned to Julia, his expression worried and tense. "I don't want any of this to make you doubt what we are," he said softly. "But the world won't make it easy." Julia took a deep breath, feeling the strength needed to continue, even though fear insisted on creeping in. "I know, but I still want to try. For us." That moment, away from prying eyes, was a silent pact between two hearts that, even fragile and wounded, dared to dream together. However, fate seemed to toy with their hopes. The next morning, Julia was surprised by an unexpected visit. The police were knocking at her door, questioning her about anonymous reports involving her and Leonardo. The scandal began to loom over her life, threatening to destroy what had been built with so much effort. As she answered the questions, she felt the world crumbling around her. Thoughts raced in turmoil. How to protect her mother, how to face suspicion and prejudice. Leonardo was by her side, but even he seemed to drink in the bitterness of the moment. "We can't let them win this war," he said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You are my truth." In that warm embrace, Julia found an unlikely fortress, a place where pain turned into strength and struggle became hope. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges that would test the limits of love and courage. But there, in that silent dawn, they vowed to face the storms together, learning that in the game of life, genuine feeling is the greatest weapon. The city might seem indifferent outside, but within that small universe, love began to become what truly heals, a silent revolution capable of transforming not just two lives, but an entire system. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this one. The sun was hiding behind the buildings of Chicago, tinting the sky with shades of orange and purple as the city prepared for another night of hustle and secrets. In the silence of Leonardo's apartment, which felt more like a refuge amid the external turmoil, Julia absent-mindedly fiddled at the kitchen table, her fingers slightly aching from sleepless nights and the weight of accumulating decisions. The news of the scandal involving her and Leonardo continued to echo through the corridors of power and media. Headlines hinted at irregularities, dark connections, and family intrigues. A dirty game that, no matter how much they wanted to ignore, threatened to swallow everything they had achieved together. However, despite the chaos, there was something that remained firm. The true connection that was growing between them, capable of crossing even the darkest nights without fading. Julia felt his presence before she even heard the door close. Leonardo entered with a tired face, his eyes carrying the anguish of a few hours without rest. Wordlessly, she extended her hand, and he held it firmly, a silent anchor. "They will use every weapon they have," he murmured, "but they won't be able to dismantle what we've built." She nodded, and a flicker of a tired smile crossed her face. They knew there was no room for illusions, but perhaps reality could be faced together, with honesty and courage. In the following days, they began to plan their response, seeking discreet allies within the system and gathering evidence that could defend the truth. Leonardo proved tireless, facing powerful adversaries with the coldness of a strategist and the determination of someone who had finally found their reason to fight. Meanwhile, Julia dealt with the constant internal conflict. She knew that this battle transcended personal limits and became a symbol of resistance against the social stigma she had always faced. At home, with her fragile mother and the growing emptiness, The weight of responsibility felt almost unbearable on her shoulders. On a rainy afternoon, Leonardo surprised her with a walk through the streets of Lincoln Park, away from the false glamour of events and tight schedules. They strolled slowly through graffiti-covered alleys, smelling freshly baked bread from the diners and the refreshing aroma of wet earth after the rain. "I wanted to show you that there is life beyond all of this," he said, looking at her with a tenderness she was beginning to understand. Julia sighed, allowing her mind to rest in that moment of calm. "I want to believe," she replied, feeling the weight of the words as a plea. The closeness between them continued to grow, not just in secret meetings, but in the little things, in exchanged glances, in hands intertwining leisurely, in the complicity that didn't need to be spoken aloud. However, just when hope seemed to take its first firm steps, the unexpected arose. A phone call while she was preparing a hot tea interrupted the newly found peace. On the other end of the line, an official voice informed her that an internal investigation was being opened against Leonardo, motivated by veiled pressures from those who did not accept his change in stance. The news fell like a silent bomb, threatening to destabilize the fragile ground they were building. The following days were marked by tense meetings, difficult decisions, and constant alertness about what might come next. Julia felt an increasing urge to protect Leonardo, but even more, a deep desire for both of them to break free from the invisible shackles that bound them. On a quiet night, when the city seemed to breathe in sync with their hearts, Leonardo held Julia's face in his hands, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how this story will end," he confessed, "but I know I don't want to go through it without you." She smiled, feeling the truth pulse in her chest. Me too," she replied. "We are in this together, come what may." And so, amidst clouds of uncertainty and still fragile dreams, they decided not to back down. The love growing in their hearts was the force that propelled them, the fire that warmed even when everything seemed to be collapsing. At that moment, Chicago continued its frantic movement, oblivious to the personal dramas unfolding within. But in that small universe, a silent promise was being forged. Love, even in the face of the greatest adversities, could be the safe haven and the revolution capable of turning the tide. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. Autumn began to paint the parks and streets of Chicago with golden and red hues, while the cold wind whispered secrets among the leaves that fell slowly to the ground. In the heart of this transforming urban landscape, Julia and Leonardo found themselves facing a decisive chapter in their journey, a point where the past and future intertwined irrevocably. The progress of the internal investigation left the corporate environment in a climate of almost palpable tension. The headquarters of Smith Enterprises stood imposing against the grey sky, its windows reflecting the collective unease that invaded the glass and steel corridors. Leonardo, despite his impeccable uniform and confident stride, carried a shadow on his shoulders, a vulnerability that he rarely allowed to show. That morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, he received an invitation to a crucial meeting with the board of directors, where he would need to defend not only his character, but the vision he dared to reinterpret. Julia remained by his side, her gaze steady and filled with a love that transcended the boundaries imposed by society. "No matter what they say," she asserted as he adjusted his tie, "you are not alone. Whatever the outcome, we are in this together." Leonardo managed a smile that contained all the gratitude and strength that blossomed from that unwavering affection. "I need to show that I can be more than the spoiled kid they think I am," he said, adjusting the lapel of his suit. that I deserve this chance, not just for myself, but for our truth. The meeting was a mix of whispers, calculated glances, and words as sharp as daggers. The silence among the participants was so heavy that it seemed to weigh more than Leonardo's very fate at the company. Every argument, every defense was a battle for his existence in that world. Julia, at home, followed along through messages and phone calls, feeling her heart race with each update, holding her breath at every pause. By the end of the day, exhausted and with visible signs of wear, Leonardo arrived at the apartment he shared with Julia. The door closed behind him, and the silence of the house allowed him to crumble for a moment. "You were amazing," she said, taking off his coat, her eyes glistening. "Did you see how you fought? You fought not just for yourself, but for us." He rested his head on her shoulders, feeling the city's air mix with the sweet aroma of the coffee she had lovingly prepared. "I can't promise that I won," he murmured, "but I promise I won't give up." "It is." The following weeks were a whirlwind of intense hope and despair. Meetings, rumors, and the relentless pressure from adversaries made the couple navigate between doubts and certainties, embracing every small victory as a breath of relief. One afternoon, marked by a light rain that soaked the sidewalks of Michigan Avenue, Leonardo received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line, the official voice confirmed that the investigation had been closed due to lack of concrete evidence, and his position at the company was secure, a triumph, albeit fragile. Tears streamed down his face at that moment, not merely for the victory, but for having someone by his side who believed, endured, and fought alongside him. In the following meeting, in the small apartment that was the couple's sanctuary, the celebration was held in silence, between shy smiles and glances that spoke more than 1,000 words. "We did it," Julia sighed, looking at Leonardo with a mix of pride and tenderness. "And it wouldn't have been possible without you," he replied, holding her hands tightly. "You are the reason I didn't give up." But life, as always, had its surprises in store. Amidst the calm, a phone call brought news about Julia's mother's condition. The surgery, which had previously been awaited with optimism, was presenting unexpected complications. Fear and uncertainty returned to haunt their days, testing the couple's resilience. In that whirlwind, between the light and the shadows weaving their path, Julia and Leonardo found in love a strength to continue, a beacon in the storm, a promise that together they could face any adversity, reinvent their destinies, and transform their lives. The city of Chicago remained indifferent with its frantic routine and deep contrasts, but for them, that turbulent universe began to reveal possibilities. The revelation that true love is the most powerful revolution. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The early morning in Chicago was a dark cloak dotted with the lights of buildings and traffic that never seemed to rest. In the modestly lit apartment, Julia could hardly contain the excitement that consumed her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she held the phone with trembling hands, the cord pressed to her ear like a thin line connecting her to hope and fear. On the other end of the line, the nurse's voice quickly reassured her, explaining the details of the surgery her mother had just undergone. The operation had been delicate, full of risks, and still required an intense recovery period filled with uncertainties. Julia closed her eyes, feeling the bitter taste of nervousness tighten her throat. She took a deep breath, seeking the strength she needed to face that challenge, not just for herself, but for the woman she loved so much, whose fragility reminded her of all the battles they would still have to face. In the room, Leonardo heard the conversation, and when Julia hung up, he approached slowly, enveloping her in a tight, wordless embrace. Their hearts beat in the same nervous rhythm, an existential pulse of those who, despite the storm, still dared to dream. "We will get through this," he promised, his fingers brushing her hair, trying to convey all the security he could offer at that moment. Together. The following weeks were marked by exhausting routines: hospital, care, medications, countless comings and goings, as Mrs. Johnson's health fluctuated between days of improvement and others of regression. Julia divided her time between her professional duties and caring for her mother, while Leonardo did his best to be present, aligning commitments and giving up parties and business to support her. In those difficult hours, the apartment was filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the warm texture of the blankets that wrapped Mrs. Johnson, and the comforting sound of the low conversations that Julia and Leonardo shared. Small moments made of knowing glances, shy laughter and confidences, even when fatigue pressed down on their shoulders. "You have been my fortress," Julia confessed one night when anxiety threatened to turn into a storm. "Even when I feel weak, you hold my hand and remind me that we are not alone." Leonardo squeezed her hands, his voice firm but sweet. "We have built a world where truth matters more than appearances, and that's why it will work out." Even with the love they tried to cultivate, the past insisted on making its presence felt. Rumors and judgments, coming from distant social circles but capable of shattering the peace they sought, loomed like shadows on the horizon. Prejudice, still subtle and sharp, tested their limits, casting doubts in conversations with friends, implying reticence at family lunches, and throwing sidelong glances in the workplace. Julia felt the weight of it all as an invisible burden, but Leonardo's gaze was the fuel that fed her courage, and he, in turn, learned to confront fears he thought were buried, transmuting pain into renewed drive. On a sunny morning, they decided to take an important step: visit a community center in the outskirts that offered support to families in vulnerable situations, especially those dealing with health crises and financial difficulties. They wanted to connect with something greater, find strength in solidarity, and show that genuine affection could be the seed for real change. The walk to the center was immersed in the sounds of the city: children running, street vendors with their lively shouts, scents of lemonade and freshly baked cheese bread. Julia felt the warmth of humanity mingling with the cool air. There, among shared stories and outstretched hands, they found reflections of their own pains and battles, and the certainty that they too could, together, make a difference. That night, back in the apartment, the connection felt even deeper. A silent reverence for the strength born from their encounter with each other and the world, with all its contradictions. "We are more than what the past tries to define," Leonardo said, looking into Julia's bright eyes. "We are the sum of our struggles and the courage to start anew." She smiled with the lightness of someone who had found, amidst ruins and dreams, a home where she could finally be who she truly was, with all her imperfections and hopes. The city continued its relentless rhythm, between winding alleys and wide avenues, but in that small refuge, Julia and Leonardo discovered that even amidst adversities, true love was the light that illuminated the way, the silent revolution capable of transforming not just lives, but also souls. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The clock in the living room marked almost midnight, but Julia and Leonardo's small apartment remained lit by a dim light that flickered as if it were part of the calm and steady breath that kept them united. The slightly open window let in the cool night breeze, carrying the distant scent of fresh coffee mixed with his woodsy cologne and the subtle aroma of the hand sanitizer Julia used to protect herself from a world that didn't always understand who she was. In that moment of quiet, the silence between them was not empty, but rather filled with unspoken meanings. Leonardo, with his gaze always so impenetrable, kept his attention fixed on her intertwined hands. The contact was subtle, but carried a heavy weight, almost like a silent pact that they would not give up. That despite the storms, the strength of what they were building would keep them both standing. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "About tomorrow. About everything that's still to come." Julia raised her eyes and found in them that shine she knew well, a mix of fear and hope, of challenge and surrender. "I know," she replied with a tired but determined smile. "But you said you would be with me, remember?" He gently squeezed her hands. "And I am, but I can't promise it will be easy, because maybe it will be very difficult." She took a deep breath, the sweaty palms of her hands contrasting with the firmness of his voice. "We have been through so much that giving up now would be an injustice to everything we have fought for." Uditi. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside, far away but constant, like the uncontrollable pulse of the city surrounding them. In the days that followed, the routine became a complex choreography, full of unexpected encounters and unforeseen challenges. Leonardo, Julia felt the pressure in the business world grow. Former allies were distancing themselves, discredited by the intrigues and the image change she was trying to build alongside Leonardo. At the same time, she faced her own battles, a hospital environment that was overwhelming her strength, her mother's slow recovery, and the disapproving looks from those who couldn't accept a humble woman beside a man of prestige. On one of those days, when exhaustion seemed almost to crush them, Julia received a message from someone she never imagined she would hear from. Her brother, Mark. Their relationship had been marked by misunderstandings, unhealed wounds, and a pride that was hard to overcome. But in that simple text, he asked to see her. The opportunity to rebuild bridges that had long been broken became a theme that flooded her thoughts relentlessly. During dinner, Leonardo noticed the turmoil that the idea provoked in the woman he had learned to love in such a special way. "Do you want to pursue this?" he said, adjusting the napkin on the table. "Or would you prefer me to stay here, holding your hand while you decide?" She smiled in a way that lit up the entire room. "I will. We need more people to win this fight. We need to be family." In that decision, love and social challenges intertwined even more deeply. The act of seeking Mark was not just a reunion, but a declaration that the past would not define the future, that courage could be the thread that united lost fragments. The next morning, with a grey sky and a light drizzle falling, Julia met Mark in a neighborhood park. The fear of a cold and dry reunion dissipated the moment they saw each other, replaced by trembling hugs and conversations filled with memories, old grievances, and silent forgiveness. "No matter what happened," Mark said, holding her gaze, "I always wanted things to be different between us." Julia felt the emotion tighten her chest, her voice choked. "Me too, and I think now is our time." Meanwhile, Leonardo looked out the window, feeling her presence even from a distance, hoping that the bonds still missing to be rebuilt would be the foundation for a possible future. The city continued to narrate its stories of contrasts, of loves that face inequalities, of hearts willing to fight against everything. And there, in the midst of that tangle of steel and concrete, Julia and Leonardo reaffirmed that true feeling could be the seed for transformation, not only of their lives, but of an entire reality that cried out for justice, love, and hope. Let us know in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The sun began to set behind the tall buildings of Chicago when Leonardo parked the car in front of the old building where Julia lived when she was a child. The silence inside the car exuded a mix of expectation and nervousness as he observed the slightly open door of the apartment with faded colors from successive coats of paint, silent witnesses of a life marked by struggles and resilience. Julia, who had arrived a little earlier, took a deep breath, her fingers intertwined in the strap of the worn bag she had carried since the beginning of college. The reunion with her brother had reopened old wounds, but also awakened a cautious hope, like a green sprout emerging between the cracks of concrete. When they opened the door to enter that small room, permeated by the smell of mold and memories stored in yellowed boxes, Julia felt the weight of the past, and at the same time the lightness of a new beginning. Mark, thinner than she remembered, with deep dark circles under his eyes, smiled with a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. "I thought I would never have the courage to come back here," she said in a whisper, still absorbing the reunion. "Me too," he replied, scratching the back of his neck. "But we can't run away from who we were. We can only choose who we want to be." At the core of that simple sentence, a bridge was being extended between echoes of yesterday and the steps that still needed to be taken for tomorrow. Meanwhile, in the office of Smith Enterprises, Leonardo faced a new battle. The pressure from investors was rising, and the need to demonstrate stability and control amid a volatile market challenged him like never before. He found himself torn between maintaining his authentic stance, inspired by Julia, or yielding to the game of appearances and power that marked that universe. During a crucial meeting, the cold environment contrasted with the pulsating tension in the air. The gazes weighed upon him, questioning his ability to guide the company in a different direction, less relentless and more humane. "You need to understand that the market doesn't respond to idealism," cut in one of the advisors, his tone sharp and decisive. "Either you deliver solid results or you'll lose everything you've built." Leonardo closed his eyes for a brief moment, the voice echoing in his head the words Julia once said, "Being strong doesn't mean giving up who you are." And with a dry throat he replied, "Our values are not obstacles. They are the foundation of our strength. We cannot abandon who we are to please the market." A chorus of murmurs swept through the room, a mix of disbelief and unease taking shape. The challenge was not just professional, it was moral, intimate, a cruel battle between who one truly was and what the world demanded one to be. In the following days, Julia felt her body tired, emotionally drained. Between visits to her mother in the hospital and meetings with Mark, trying to rebuild a shattered family, she found in Leonardo a safe harbor, someone who not only listened, but fought alongside her. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said after. "It was a difficult night. Let's build this together, every step, every word." A tear slipped down her face, her faint smile illuminating the room at that moment. "Thank you for being my rock," she replied, and there, in that tight embrace, they both found the courage to carry on. However, the peace was still fragile. The weight of social expectations, the pressure of the corporate world, and the past that insisted on demanding its price threatened to engulf what they had achieved. On a stormy night, when the sky erupted with thunder that shook the windows, surprising news arrived through an urgent phone call. An influential investor was trying to sabotage Leonardo's project, using shady contacts to plant doubts about his credibility. In the silence that followed, as the sound of rain flooded the apartment, Julia and Leonardo exchanged glances. There were not enough words to express the fear, the frustration, but there was the certainty that, together, they would resist. "If anyone wants to crumble what we've built," she said, her voice firm, "they will have to go through me too." Leonardo squeezed her hands, his gaze burning with renewed determination. "This isn't just my fight, it's ours." And so, under the cloak of the rainy night, with their hearts beating in unison, they reaffirmed their commitment to face not only the ghosts of the past, but also the shadows threatening their present. A love that, resilient and brave, became the greatest revolution against the injustices and prejudices of a world that still needed to learn to see with the heart. As the city slept under the unrelenting rain in that small refuge, love flourished, stronger than storms, firmer than doubts and barriers. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The dawn brought with it a grey fog that enveloped Chicago like a cloak of uncertainties, spreading through the busy streets and buildings that seemed to silently observe the battle unfolding inside that small apartment. Inside, Julia and Leonardo exchanged determined glances, while the weight of the sabotage threatened to tear apart everything they had built together. Leonardo remained seated at the living room table, his restless fingers gliding over the laptop keyboard where the screens displayed numbers and graphs that blurred in his tired mind. His furrowed brow, with slight shadows under his eyes, betrayed sleepless nights in search of answers that still insisted on eluding him. When Julia entered, bringing 2 steaming cups of coffee, the bitter and comforting aroma lingered in the air, drawing him into a brief moment of pause. "You said you wouldn't let anyone destroy what we've built," she said, placing one of the cups next to the electronic equipment. Leonardo looked up, meeting the steady shine in her eyes, and an exhausted yet genuine smile lit up his face. "Neither you nor I," he replied, and in the silent promise embedded in that phrase, they found a momentary refuge. The phones buzzed throughout the morning, signals of the battles multiplying outside, messages from allies, contacts with lawyers crafting strategies to contain the blow, demands to manage damage to the company's image. This was an invisible war, fought in closed meetings and stuffy hallways, but it touched the essence of the dream they dared to live. Amidst this storm, small moments of tenderness emerged like sparks of light. A call from Mark, with his pained yet hopeful voice, a message from an old friend insisting on believing in change, the comforting touch of hands intertwining when words were not enough to express fears and longings. When the invitation to a charity event organized by the community center they visited months ago came up, Julia and Leonardo saw an opportunity to show that the love and determination that united them went far beyond market disputes. They represented a bridge between distinct worlds, celebrating hope. The event hall was beautifully lit, golden chandeliers casting warm reflections on faces that, despite the difficulties, shone with genuine joy. Among hugs and greetings, they walked side by side, feeling the scent of his woody fragrance mingling with the aroma of home-cooked meals and fresh flowers present there. "I never imagined I would see a scene like this here," Julia commented, smiling as she squeezed the wrinkled hand of one of the ladies present, who returned it with a warm gaze. "Neither did I," replied Leonardo, his voice deep yet soft, "but it's our truth. And that's what matters." The night passed between heartfelt speeches and laughter that echoed like music. As they took the stage to express their gratitude, Julia's heart raced. She felt the presence of those people not as mere spectators, but as a living part of that story of love and resistance. "Thank you all," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "for proving that even in a world so full of contradictions, solidarity is our strongest force." Leonardo smiled beside her and spoke with conviction. "It hasn't been easy, but we know we are not alone, and that is what gives us the courage to fight for a future that celebrates differences and breaks down barriers." When they stepped down from the stage, their eyes met, filled with a silent certainty. They were charting a new course together, full of risks, yes, but wrapped in hope. A few days later, an unexpected proposal changed the landscape once again. The rival investor, the one who had been working to undermine Leonardo's credibility, surprised them by offering a negotiation, a move that mixed recognition and calculation, an attempt to break the unbreakable resistance they had built. In the dim light of the office, between the cold LED light and the shadows that filled the space, Julia and Leonardo discussed the offer. It was a carefully packaged trap, or perhaps a chance, risky, inconsistent, but still, an opportunity to establish some kind of peace. "We cannot back down," Julia stated, her gaze determined. "But we also cannot turn a blind eye to the game. We need to learn the rules to change the board." Leonardo watched her for a moment, feeling for the first time convinced that the shared love, the joint effort, provided them not only with the strength to resist, but also the clarity to transform adversities into achievements. The sigh that escaped his lips was the shy and sincere relief of someone who understands that despite the battles, it is only worth continuing to fight when you have someone by your side capable of turning those struggles into hope. As night fell, painting the city in deep shades of blue and black in that small refuge where love and dreams blossomed side by side, there was a promise whispered by the wind and kept in both their hearts. Love is the greatest revolution one can live, capable of opening paths and touching the impossible. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this. The next morning, the sun barely peeked over the horizon when the city began to awaken to the sound of the first buses and the hustle and bustle of commerce. The sky was clear, an almost ironic contrast to the emotional storm unfolding in Julia's heart. In the bedroom, the reflection of the golden light filtered through the thin curtains, casting shapes that danced slowly on the walls, but inside her, the shadows of the previous day still lingered. She sat on the edge of the bed, her trembling fingers covering her cell phone. On the screen, the message from the rival investor, formal proposal attached, a tempting offer that needed to be carefully unraveled. Her eyes scanned the coldly written words, each weighing on her chest like a twig immersed in mud. Amidst it all, his voice echoed in her head. "We need to learn the rules, to change the board." The room next door announced his arrival, his firm footsteps sounding against the wooden floor. Leonardo entered, his expression a mix of calm and anxiety, as if he were trying to contain the storm within himself. "Haven't you slept yet?" he asked, sitting beside her, inhaling the familiar scent of the shampoo she always used. Julia shook her head, her voice choked. "My world has turned into a puzzle of pieces that don't fit, and this offer, I don't know if it's a step forward or a disguised trap." He reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers with a gentle strength that spoke more than any words. "It's a dirty game, but we're not playing to lose. We need to be strategists, not just fighters." The silence that hung between them was not empty, but charged with deep complicity, knowing that despite the doubts, they were not alone there. That day, meetings followed one after another. Calculations, legal analyses, communication strategies aimed at protecting not just a project, but a story being written with sweat and love. As they debated each clause of the proposal, Leonardo and Julia alternated between the necessary coldness to negotiate and the warmth of hope that only genuine affection can offer. Behind closed doors, the weight of responsibilities tried to impose itself, but also in the small pauses, a touch on the shoulder, a discreet glance, they found the strength to continue. It was a complex dance between trust and insecurity, facts and feelings, risk and certainty. The news of the possible negotiation leaked into the market, reigniting the fire of speculation. Journalists sought statements, allies sought positions. At the same time, within the couple's inner circle, the balance hung between the fear of giving too much and the hope that in the end, life would surprise them. On a cold night, while the city sparkled with lights reflecting the sleepless life, Julia and Leonardo decided they needed a moment just for themselves. On the building's terrace, the wind carried the distant aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the muffled sound of traffic that never completely ceased. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the warmth contrasting with the cool air. "Are we on the right path?" she whispered, avoiding his gaze. Leonardo squeezed her hand, his eyes lost in the infinity of the city. "I don't know if there is a right path, just ours. We're doing this together, even if it's based on courage and stubbornness." He turned to face her, his eyes carrying a contained vulnerability, a silent promise. "You taught me that asking for help is not weakness, that true strength lies in facing everything hand in hand." Julia smiled, the tear she tried to hold back, now sliding freely down her face, not from weakness but from relief, from renewed courage. "Then let's continue, as far as it takes." The following days were a race against the clock, with decisive meetings, tense negotiations, and the constant game of appearances that the corporate world demanded. With each advance or retreat, they felt the weight of the choice, as if every step taken could rewrite not only their future, but the essence of what they had built. On a late afternoon, when the sky was painted orange and purple as the city began to calm down, the phone rang. Leonardo answered with a racing heart, the voice on the other end bringing a mix of words that felt like doors opening. "We did it. The proposal was accepted. The terms have been negotiated." He hung up, staring at Julia, who, sitting in the kitchen, took a sip of the coffee that now tasted different, of struggle, of victory, of possibilities. "We are ready for the next chapter," he said, a genuine smile lighting up his face. She responded with another. A smile, allowing the cold they felt to transform into warmth, knowing that the love that united them was, in fact, the greatest revolution they could experience. As night fell, New York sparkled below, a city of stories and hopes, where two hearts silently and powerfully decided to turn a dream into reality. Tell us in the comments which city you are watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very valuable. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel to receive more exciting stories like this.